Super Mecha Godzilla vs. Metal Sonic. I will only be using the canon characters here, so no Archie Metal Sonic and definitely no video game Mecha Godzillas. I will still be cross-scaling the two respective characters with their older interpretations and stuff like that, meaning obviously Super Mecha Godzilla gets to scale up from Showa stuff, and Sonic's cast gets to scale up from the classic games, as that's kind of canon to it. So let's hop right into it. Starting with Mechagodzilla. As a baseline, he just upscales the Showa era, as the strongest characters in the Showa era are weaker than their Heisei counterparts, those being Showa Godzilla and Showa Ghidorah, under both Heisei Godzilla and both Heisei Ghidorah and Mecha Ghidorah. Which is going to be important later, because Mecha Ghidorah has some pretty absurd stuff in the scaling chain here. Starting with the Showa era, as a baseline, this guy's already going to be way above the original Godzilla. The original Godzilla has plenty of mountain statements, as well as city-level arguments, and even some country-level feats, arguably, or potentially all the way up into island level, as well as having one durability feat that can get into multi-continental, that being the Oxygen Destroyer. Now, the Oxygen Destroyer's feat's a little strange, because some people like to hype it up to get even further in the multi-continental, sometimes even moon, and sometimes even small planetary. But for me, I don't think you should really scale to the full yield of it, as he still died from it. I still do think it does grant a multi-continental level durability, and obviously some resistance to that particular type of destruction. However, this is just the very tip of the iceberg for Godzilla scaling. The Showa era really picks up with Ghidorah and Zone Fighter. With Ghidorah, not only does he use supergravity, an extra-dimensional form of gravity, it would transcend the base Godzilla universe's cosmology by full dimensionality, as in spatial dimensions that transcend each other, not like the dimensions you see in stuff like string theory, which technically do not transcend each other at all, and just work in tandem with each other. Nor is this like the dimensions that more so affect time, as that's a completely different subset of dimensions that have nothing to do with this. These are the dimensions that make characters stronger, is what I'm trying to say. Not some of the theoretical versions of dimensions that don't do that at all, that people sometimes get confused with this. These are the real deal transcendatory dimensions. So, to answer how powerful Ghidorah is, you have to first answer how big the base Godzilla universe is. Well, we know the full multiverse is potentially like 6+ dimensional. The reason we know this is from prequels to the Heisei era, which is the same general cosmology as the Showa era. However, the multiverse is significantly bigger than the universe, obviously. So universes in Godzilla do contain 4th dimensional space. We know this from Zone Fighter. There's also 4th dimensional attacks and characters within that same series that can exist within the universe. There's even one that can just raise the dimensionality of 3D space around him to 4th dimensional, which is pretty absurd for a hacks ability, but essentially, the Godzilla universe is most likely 4th dimensional off what little we do know about it. There isn't too much context on it outside Zone Fighter and some stuff in guidebooks, as well as prequel films like Orochi the Eight-Headed Dragon, which is technically sort of canon to the Showa era and definitely canon to the Heisei era. Regardless, the cosmology of that film would scale to the Showa era, even if it was not canon, which I'm fairly sure it is, since it's just a branching timeline. The Showa era and Heisei eras are. So off that, yeah, Ghidorah has unironically 5th dimensional arguments, which is low complex multiversal, by the way. Now, do I think this is the most consistent for Ghidorah? Not really. I do think you could just argue he's more so 4th dimensional. But this is something that is consistent with later versions of him, such as Heisei Ghidorah. So I'll let it slide here. Now, before we get into Super Mechagodzilla himself, we have to talk about prior Heisei villains, and there's two that kind of just, well, 2 sets that kind of just scale to each other in a weird way, that kind of amps both their scaling up. And that is Mothra and Batra, and then Ghidorah and Mecha Ghidorah. Mecha Ghidorah was able to draw power from a space outside the main timeline. The way he time travels, essentially he breaks through the time barrier and goes into what is described as a higher world, where he then draws power from it, breaks back into another timeline, and that's how he fought Godzilla. Godzilla also somehow sensed him in that level of like reality, which is kind of a weird power, but I guess Godzilla has it according to Toho now. Regardless, though, a space beyond the base Godzilla cosmology that is at bare minimum already 4D in a universe, and potentially 5D if you believe the supergravity in the cosmology already, which there's many implications that that is in fact the case with Space Godzilla later, but I won't really get into that. This would put this higher world anywhere between 5th to potentially 6th dimensional. And this is important because this is generally where the Godzilla multiverse would almost scale, as the Godzilla multiverse also transcends this, as it's the bigger cosmology. I mean, you would either be deeper into this level or just a higher dimensionality outright. And Mothra and Batra are kind of like a weird avatar reincarnation thing of two gods that were born of a Big Bang that made that multiverse, not just the universe. Big Bang that nothing really scales to until Burning Godzilla officially, but you can kind of argue they should at least be in the same general dimensionality, just to a far lesser degree. So you could already argue like 6th dimensional off this. But the problem is, most implications for stuff on this level imply that nothing really gets there until Burning Godzilla. Nothing gets to the 6D, 7D range yet. And this is especially true since Space Godzilla using supergravity in the Heisei era, a supergravity it's implied to be stronger than the Showa counterpart version, so potentially a 6th dimensional supergravity, is implied to be like the biggest threat that Godzilla's ever faced and be on a whole different dimensionality than everything else. So scaling anything before Space Godzilla to 6D, in my opinion, is a little iffy, but you can technically do it. The only problem with that is it kind of has some issues with the plot of the series. But regardless, though, Super Mecha Godzilla would just scale to this general level of power, which is made even more consistent with it, as the Godzilla he fought, the one that fought Super Mecha Godzilla, is in an official Toho guide directly compared to Orochi, who was able to fight the two gods, well, not really fight, but get his ass kicked and not instantly die, I guess, to the two gods that Mothra and Batra sort of scale to. So, off that, yeah, Mecha Godzilla is pretty overpowered. With, in my opinion, off what we do have for him in the Heisei era, he'd be at least 5D, potentially 6D. How far into either of those is pretty debatable, but we do know he's under Godzilla, who is under Space Godzilla dimensionality, which makes me a little hesitant to make him outright 6D. So he's somewhat in a complex multiversal range of power, but we don't really know exactly where. He's in a weird area in the Heisei era where we can't really pinpoint an exact level for him, as he didn't really have any set dimensionality amps or anything. Unlike characters like Space Godzilla, Ghidorah, Mothra, and Destroya, who all have pretty dead-set dimensionalities that you can scale off of feats within the films, Mechagodzilla is just kind of a weird place there. As for speed and abilities, well, he should just kind of scale to two other characters to a lesser degree. I think he would kind of scale to Mothra Leo, just not quite on that level. And Mothra Leo is a character that can hit light speed in the Heisei Godzilla cosmology, which is apparently just straight up time travel, because that's what it does when it pops up in the film. This is consistent with multiple other characters that hit these speeds actually having feats of at least infinite speed, such as Space Godzilla being able to travel across the infinite Godzilla universe from the edge of it to Earth in like very, very much finite time. And his crystals are actually faster than that, so you could unironically argue they're immeasurable. But it's weird because all of this stuff just kind of upscales Super Mechagodzilla to a degree. And it would really only be in reaction speeds, not travel speeds. Even though Mogira can kind of match Space Godzilla's travel speed, I don't think Mechagodzilla's on that level, as Mogira is like heavily implied to be a lot stronger than Super Mechagodzilla. Regardless, though, Super Mechagodzilla would still be incredibly fast. I'd say at least approaching infinite speed to immeasurable speed, but not quite on the same level that we see later on in the Heisei era. And as for abilities, well, it's mostly just beams. Lots and lots of beams and energy attacks, as well as deflectors that can actually send enemies' attacks back at them at levels thousands of times above what they were initially shot at, though these did get overpowered. And there's also like some shock wires and stuff. It's nothing that's like too insane. Super Mechagodzilla is a very straightforward Mechagodzilla. It's just gonna blast the hell out of you until you're not moving. So, what does Metal Sonic have to match this guy? Well, quite a bit. For starters, the Sonic cosmology is also at least 4D on a universal level. There's a lot of stuff to back this, but we know there's definitely at least 4D realms that then get transcended by stuff later on. So, as a baseline, yeah, He's already in the Uni Plus categories of power, but he gets a lot higher. He would definitely upscale the Egg Salamander, which was already confirmed to be on a level of dimensionality above the base 4D that we already have. So that's 5D. And then characters like Solaris can apparently infect at least thousands to hundreds or sometimes even millions of timelines, but there's a lot of implications implying it could be infinite timelines. Solaris also exists in the past, present, and future all simultaneously, and even that level of OP is under stuff like Infinite, who is, you know, confirmed to be the strongest villain in Sonic up to that point. Until Metal shows up, as Metal's confirmed to be stronger than him, but, well, Neo Metal Sonic, but whatever. This is also backed up by Neo Metal Sonic being above Time Eater, who was going to destroy all of reality, which would imply more universal to multiversal level stuff. It's even complex multiversal stuff. And it just gets even more insane from there. Solaris has arguments of being on par with where I currently scale Space Godzilla. Why is that? Well, Solaris would already upscale a fifth-dimensional cosmology at least, but is also described as being super-dimensional on top of that, which would imply at least being one-dimensionality above this, which would be 6D. So, yeah, Metal would scale to that to a far higher degree, as even Infinite is above this, and Neo Metal is significantly stronger than Infinite now. And this is before using transformations like his super form, as well as his Metal Overlord form, which is arguably even above the super form. Add on that Metal just has so much absurd hacks and other crazy abilities, and that you can unironically scale him up to 8D through different scaling chains that I don't need to use here. Yeah, he's kind of insane, and it gets even more insane with the speed levels, as Sonic has had an immeasurable speed since, like, ever. There's, like, literal timeless zones that Sonic can just move around in. There's also spaces where time and space are just, like, distorted and kind of not existent. Sonic can fly around just fine in there. And characters like Infinite in base would already be well above that, and then Metal's well above that as well. So, yeah, when it comes to speed, Metal Sonic is pretty unsurprisingly extremely fast. And this is me kind of being low-bally to a degree, as I could definitely use higher stuff for Metal Sonic here to get him all the way up to higher dimensionalities like 7 and 8 dimensional. Not really anywhere higher than that, but there is ways to get him up there. Do I think they're the most consistent with what Sonic shows in the series? Not really, but they do exist. So with Metal Sonic's not really that hard to explain scaling out of the way, I think the winner's kind of obvious. Metal Sonic absolutely obliterates Super Mechagodzilla. I mean, let's just look at who takes what here. When it comes to abilities, Metal has way more variety. He has way more just insane stuff to pull from, plus transformations that give him even more stuff, and he can copy other characters' abilities through biodata. Now, I don't think that would really work on another robot, but he could mimic it to a degree. Is some people that think he copied Omega's abilities, since I guess Omega has biodata. I don't think that's ever explicitly stated to be the case, but if that was the case, then yeah, he could just steal Mechagodzilla's abilities. And then when it comes to raw power, Metal Sonic is consistently at a fifth. Like, it's like definitely fifth dimensional, and he's even arguably consistently sixth dimensional plus. There's obviously arguments to get him up to 7, 8 dimensional. Mechagodzilla is fifth dimensional to a consistent end, maybe sixth dimensional, if you think he scales to stuff that kind of goes against later movies. Any higher than that, and you're just kind of wanking him. So Metal definitely has the consistent strength advantage here, and obviously the speed advantage as well. Mechagodzilla basically hinges on the fact he downscales from characters that have infinite to immeasurable speed, whereas Metal Sonic upscales off characters that have that fairly casually way earlier in the series, like to a massive degree. So yeah, this fight wouldn't really be a fight, it'd be a slaughter. Now, I do think Super Mechagodzilla could have been a real threat if he got upgraded, like, to be the level of, like, Mogura. I think a Mogura-style Mechagodzilla would do better here, but I still think Metal would win. Base Metal. I think any transformations, then it's even more overkill. So, yeah, that's my take on this. Strongest Mechagodzilla versus, well, a character that a lot of people wanted Mechagodzilla to fight. And as you can see, yeah, Mechagodzilla does not win here. This is one of the few times I think a Heisei's character is actually lost on my channel, which is kind of surprising because I use them a lot. Regardless though, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.